So thank you very much for the opportunity of coming and talking to you all today. As Tamara said, my name is Andrew Mosawi. I'm the president of iATS. This is not my first time round. I actually started at iATS back in 2002. This was when we were actually serving non-profits. We had one non-profit customer, the David Suzuki Foundation, that is still a customer of ours today. And I was hired to start rolling out the program, our transaction processing program to non-profit organizations. And I stayed until 2007, when I left to be the VP of International for Blackbaud. And I was there until 2012, and then left for a few years to do my own thing, and joined iATS again last year. So it's a pleasure to be back. It's an honor to be back in this sector. I love the non-profit sector. I love serving the non-profit sector. And in fact, I've done several of these user groups. My first one ever was at the art gallery. If anyone remembers that one, there were some really cracking ones at the art gallery. I don't know, the crowd was a little more rowdy afterwards. I think that was after a couple of vodka tonics. So what I'm here to do today is scare you silly about credit card fraud and PCI compliance, and talk a little bit about it. I think the goal here is to sort of share a little bit about what PCI compliance is and what the risks to us as non-profit organizations are from a credit card perspective, from a fraud perspective. So I'd like to start off by doing a pop quiz. And you did warn me about this. I'll do that again. So, actually, what I will do before I end, who's heard of iATS? How many of you use iATS? Okay, so maybe most of you do, but I'll just sort of briefly. We're a credit card processor and a transaction processor for the non-profit sector. We've been around since 1996 and serving the non-profit sector since 2002. We're partner-driven, which that means is we work with software partners. So we work with the likes of Blackbaud and other providers to the non-profit sector, and we provide the back-end credit card processing services for their systems. So obviously Blackbaud integrates with several credit card processors. They obviously have their own merchant services, and iATS is another one of their preferred processors. We love the statistics of the last one, the best-in-class customer service. Over 2,400 customers have been using us for over 10 years. And our first customer is still using us, and we're very proud of that. We're a local business. We're based in downtown Vancouver. We've always been based in downtown Vancouver. And we're owned by another Canadian company that owns everything in the world, the Ontario Teachers' Pension Fund. So we're a Canadian-owned and a Canadian-operated company. And even though I have a funny accent, I am a Canadian. Proud of it. So how many of you take credit card donations? How many of you feel you have a solid grasp of PCI and all of its requirements? I'm really pleased, because this would have been the shortest presentation. And then the last question, which is always a funny one for me, how many of you have had their credit cards, your customers' credit cards compromised? Quite a lot. I would say now that's about sort of 30% of the room. How many of you have had your customers' credit cards data compromised, but are not going to admit to it? This is an interesting perspective, and I'm going to talk a bit about it because beforehand we talked a little bit about giving trends. What's interesting to note is that overall giving is relatively flat. If you look at US giving, if you look at Canadian giving, if you look at the UK giving, and they're the ones that we can really get stats on, it's relatively flat. It's 2%. The CAGR of it is 2% over the last 5 years. But what's interesting is that online giving has increased between 9 to 10%. And how that is relevant to our conversation today is that most online giving is by credit card. So giving trends change from country to country. So for example, we do a lot of work in the UK. We have one customer in the UK that has 400,000 monthly donations. Yeah, wow. 99% of them are on direct debit, or what they call direct debit in the UK, which is ACH, EAT. And then the rest are on credit card. So a tiny, tiny percentage are on credit card. In the US, very few of our customers are using ACH transactions to do their monthly current, even though monthly giving isn't really a very mature, they don't have very mature monthly giving programs in the US. But almost all of those are done on credit card. And we here in Canada are sort of in the middle of those things. We're sort of 60-40 really towards credit card and then ACH transactions. So what we're seeing is the trend of giving by credit card is increasing, whether we like it or not, because that's what our donors want to use. So we frame that because some organizations may say, well, it's not really relevant to me because I don't really take credit cards. I don't really need. Well, the donors' trends and the trends of how donors are giving are changing to a situation whereby that's how they want to give anyway. So what's the scary bit of this presentation is a bit about the costs and about how much danger is out there in terms of credit card fraud and what individuals are doing to actually try to compromise organizations, not just like ours in this room, but also for-profit organizations that work on a large scale. So you may have heard of the Target breach. That was 60 million credit cards. There was the TJ Maxx breach. That was 96 million credit cards were stolen. And then more recently, there was the International Hotel Group, IHG, Intercontinental, I think it's called. They had anything between, depending on the reports, it's 1,000 to 5,000 of their properties that had their data breached. 1,000 in the Middle East. And the reason I know that is that I was one of those credit cards. And it was their Dubai property that I had stayed at, and my credit card was compromised, and I had to get a new credit card. So it has a meaningful effect. It does have a meaningful effect on us as cardholders. It has a meaningful effect on the organizations as well. And what's the largest important point here is that almost all of the organizations that have had breached were not PCI compliant. So that's really why we want to talk today about the importance of PCI compliance, because it truly does help organizations reduce the instances and their risk of fraud. So what is PCI? Well, it stands for Payment Card Industry Standards. It is an initiative that was set up by Visa and MasterCard to secure downstream everyone that accepts credit cards. I'm not going to read out those slides, it's self-explanatory, and we will share these slides with you. But I think what's really important to notice is a couple things. What is it not? Well, PCI is not a checkbox. It's not a checkbox to say, okay, I'm going to get PCI. Did I get PCI? We got PCI, that's fabulous. What's next? PCI is, if I can use a cliche, it's a journey, not a destination. You are constantly evolving as an organization. The way that you fundraise is constantly organizing as an organization. And the way that you accept donations is constantly evolving and changing. So therefore, you always have to be cognizant and aware of PCI and how that covers your whole organization. Just out of interest, talk to me a little bit about, give me some examples of the sort of, obviously you're processing transactions likely through the razor's edge. But give me some examples of other ways that you're collecting credit card donations right now, outside of that environment. Eventbrite. Any others?
We've had some bad experiences with Square.
Square. Okay. So yeah, there's on an event, you're probably at a dinner or an auction or something like that. You put the swiper in, and then you swipe it. Yeah.
Some people are using Blackbaud mobile pay, right?
Yeah. So as an example, I'm on a board of a charity that does an event once a year. We do multiple events, but one big event. And after I did this walk, it was a 10K walk, they were doing child sponsorship. And I sat down and I was thinking, and I said to the CEO, I said, where are we signing up for child sponsorship program for people that do it? They said, oh yeah, it's over in that tent over there. So I actually had to go and I had to line up, and then I got a little piece of paper, and it was a piece of paper that said, if you want to become a child sponsor, then do this, and then write your credit card down. And I quickly went back to the CEO and I said, you do know who I work for, right? There are ways to improve this. So the point being that you may be collecting credit card data without you even knowing it. You may be taking data in and actually having it processed. You may have people taking it and then typing it into a machine. There may be ways that you can do it, and you have to be aware of all of the ways if indeed you're going to secure yourself and become PCI compliant. So why is it important? It is your responsibility. The PCI standards say that it is your responsibility as organizations to ensure that your organization is PCI compliant, and the people that are giving you their credit card information, they can do so knowing that you are going to look after it. And it's downstream. As I was taught in an early legal class, ignorance is no defense of the law. You can't say, well, I didn't know about it, so it's not my fault. You have to be compliant. You have to, if you accept credit cards, the default is you have to be compliant. And we're going to talk a little bit about what that means. But it's also a very positive thing. We talk about the negatives a lot, but I think the important thing is also to shout out about that. To tell your donors and to tell the people that are engaging with your organization the fact that you care about their data. You care about their safety and their security. How many of you have had their credit card compromised and they have to go get another one? It's just a pain. Because I have probably 5 to 10 recurring donations on that. Now, there are ways to get around that as a processor. We have ways to get new data, new expiry dates, new credit card data. We have ways to, but it's still a pain for the cardholder. So if you as an organization can go and say, well, we trust, we look after your data, we're PCI compliant, then it's a great assurance to give the people that are actually contributing to your organization. So we like to think of it as a positive spin, rather than just sort of coming with fear and saying, well, you have to do it because everyone's out to get you. It's more of a, we care about the data, we care about you interacting with us and giving us your credit card information, your financial information. So, what are the levels of PCI compliance? Well, there's us. We at iATS Payments, we have the highest levels of PCI compliance. We have to. We process tens of millions of transactions on a monthly basis. We have a Visa, MasterCard. We handle huge volumes of data. So for us, PCI, it's very different. Our world with PCI, we have a VP of PCI of compliance. That's all he does, Robert. All he does is manage PCI compliance. He doesn't get invited to many parties. I have said that with him in the room. He's fine. I'm not. And then, for us, for example, every single one of my staff is criminal background checked. Every single one of my staff, we have security and firewalls around our system. So, you can't come into my office and log on and download something to Dropbox or access Skype or anything like that. We were joking when we came in today about, simply getting a zip drive onto my machine and then just taking my presentation and giving it to someone else. Well, I can't do that because that's not secure. That means I could quite easily download credit card information and then take it somewhere else. So we as an organization have a responsibility to protect our staff from any issues that might happen and to protect them so there is no risk of them being compromised externally. So that's us, that's the highest level. And then it goes all the way through to merchant level 4, which, some would argue many people in this room are going to be covered under. So there are various different brackets, and you as an organization have to either self-determine, self-validate, or work with a consulting firm who will validate and let you know exactly which bracket you fall into. There are 8 self-assessment questionnaires. Ours is a several month-long process. There's 2 site visits of 3 days each, and so it's a big deal. Most organizations, I'm going to again hazard a guess, most organizations in this room are going to fall under the SAQ validation type of A. There's about 14 questions, there's no scan required, although we always recommend that you have scanning because I think it's a best practice. And again, you can do all of this online, and we're going to provide you with the details of how to do this. Many organizations will not need to seek, like we do. We have an external firm that helps us with our PCI. You may choose to. It really depends on what's best for your organization. We are not a validation organization. We do not provide that service, but we can certainly point you in the right direction if required. Any questions on any of those things, on validation? Has anyone gone through this process? Tell me a little, when did you go through the process?
2 years ago we did the internal, or 3 years ago. And last year I think we did the external.
The external. And what was the process like? Was it relatively simple? Was it painful?
Yeah, it was, I'm at University of Victoria, so, we set it up by the accounting office for policies. And then, And we were the test, we were the initial fundraising office.
Right.
The initial office that came about.
Right.
Is that because the universities do a lot more transactions with tuition as well as donations, and so it's across it's accounting's taking care of accounting for the whole
The
organization?
whole organization, yeah.
Yeah.
But we were the test office, but initially yeah, it was a bit painful going from the POS machine. We now have a computer-based machine. It's basically a computer that's PCI-DSS. We all have to use that computer to process any credit cards. I can access as a supervisor, I can access a merchant account, which shows me all the accounts that we use. But normally you go on to one merchant ID at a time to process, look at totals, things like that.
Right.
That was probably the most difficult part.
Yeah.
And we changed the finance as well. We don't use iATS, we use Mosawi. And we used Beamstream previously, which we liked more.
Yeah.
And,
Local company. They're in Victoria as well.
But the university decided to go with Mosawi, and of course that's at a different level as well. That's through purchasing. So we had no control over that. We had to go with whoever they decided.
And would you say that this PCI compliance resides with the finance, not so much advancement or fundraising? The responsibility in the organization?
Each office had to come up with their own policy, their own PCI compliant policy, because each department has their own way to use it.
Right. Because if it goes wrong, then it doesn't really matter which department it is.
We all have to map how we're using the computers, how our system is set up. So, for instance, between the call center and gift processing, and we have to map it all. So that's of course different than tuition, how they would handle theirs.
Yeah.
And then of course there's the whole food and beverage, and that's a whole different area. They would have to map their own.
And the gift shop or the
The gift
bookstore.
shop, yeah, they would all be different. They would all have to have their own color, map their own. Yeah.
I think that's the biggest challenge, which is, if you're a retail shop, it's relatively straightforward. You have a machine, and then that's it. And so here in Canada, we have EMV, we have chip and pin, we have those things. So relatively, that direct connection is secured, and our PCI environment is contained to that one piece. But because as organizations, we have it coming from multiple different places. We have online donations, we have events, we have obviously recurring donations, we may have auctions. There are a whole range of different areas that are touching credit card data. Rarely are they coming through one point. And I think that's part of the challenge with self-assessment is you have to assess every single stream. And it's not okay to say, well, we're okay there, but then there's this one area here. Well, if there's one area here that isn't, then therefore your whole organization is affected and is not then covered by the PCI certification.
But even though somebody's not using the chip or the PIN, if you're online with your card in your hand and you're making a transaction, that's considered card present.
Say that again?
So if you're online, if I'm online as a donor, and I'm using the online page to give, that's card present. If the person is there with the card. Is it not?
No. So what we're talking about is the validation, and that actually doesn't have much to do with PCI. It actually has more to do with rates. So when you physically swipe a card, the card is treated as a card present transaction, and therefore the risk is lower. So generally you get a lower interchange rate. That doesn't really matter so much in the non-profit world because Visa and MasterCard's card present rates are almost identical to the charitable rates. So you have to physically swipe a card for it to be card present. Anything that is done when you're not, even if you put in the CVV2 code, the 3-digit code on the back, it's still not deemed as a card present transaction. But again, that is more about the commercial terms, less about the PCI. Okay. Yeah. So there's definitely a card present, card not present. The card present is a retail environment, and then the card not present would be any time that somebody is giving you their data without actually physically swiping a card.
So all online transactions are not present, correct?
Card, by the definition of them, the card is not present.
Yeah.
From a commercial standpoint, and to get those lower commercial standards. And I think this goes to the point here, which is to think about, which is where is it? So you could go through a process of being PCI compliant, and that's a great question, is why you ask, which is who drives it? So that is a great question, and I don't know the answer to that. Generally it's finance in some organizations. It may be, if there is an operational team, it might be the operational team in another. It really depends on your organization, but it has to speak to the whole organization. So, for example, if you are PCI level 2 to level 3 compliant, and then you choose to run a telephone campaign, and you use a firm in Toronto or somewhere, and they do the calling, and then they also collect the credit card data. Now, if they're collecting credit card data on an Excel spreadsheet and then emailing it to you at the end of it, then suffice to say, that's not PCI compliant, and therefore you're outside of that compliance with it. So again, it goes to that journey, not a destination, because it's a constant awareness of how you're running campaigns, what campaigns are you running, how are you collecting that data, are you compliant within that data? So again, it's always the things that you have to think about, and I understand that you've got a lot to think about, and you've got a lot of responsibility, and a lot of it is another thing to think about. This is the nitty-gritty of PCI, which is if you are breached and you are not PCI and you haven't gone through the program, then Visa, Master, they have the right and the ability, and they have fined organizations.
In Canada, it's an example in Canada it's happened or no?
It has. I have been searching for an example in Canada. I've not heard of an example of it happening in Canada. It has happened many times in the US, and there are some large organizations that have been fined a significant amount of money by Visa, and in fact, they're actually countersuing because they actually believe that the amount was actually unfair compared to the compromise. But that point is that it's very real. It does exist, and they will fine you. Now, that's just the fine. There's the lack of there's a soft impact. The reputational challenges, reputational issues on your organization. It going, to the press, and the press finding out about it, and sort of having bad negative press about it. Losing donors. One has to think of a donor if the donor's card has been compromised, will they come back and then give you their data again? There are legal fees. People could sue you. If an organization actually identified you as the cause of the breach, they could sue you for not only those. The hard costs, but also any punitive damages, and they should go back and say, well, I want some damages for that as well.
When you say you, do you mean personal
I mean
or organizational?
The card holder could go to the organization.
Okay, because
So,
if I'm sitting there processing credit cards,
mm-hmm.
I'm not liable for that. My organization.
That's very, very correct. Yes. So the organization is. You personally are not, but your organization is.
It's still bad. But.
Still bad. Yes, that's it. We are. There are three ways of doing this. There are sort of, we're going to talk about it, but let's talk about the Blackbaud environment because we're in a Blackbaud user group. So iATS was a preferred payment processor for Blackbaud, and the way that Blackbaud and iATS handle the PCI within the Blackbaud and the Razor's Edge environment, and indeed the Luminate environment, and indeed most of their product ranges, is they manage everything through BBPS. So what happens is they use what's called it's the tertiary method of managing data or credit card data, and I'm going to talk about that in the next slide. Basically, what it means is that your organization isn't holding credit card data. So Razor's Edge has no credit card data in it. If you're using any one of eTapestry, was mentioning eTapestry, that doesn't have any credit card data in it. What it has is tokens, and those tokens are held either, depending on what product, it's either held within the BBPS, the Blackbaud Payment Service, or it's held within iATS. So it's either the Blackbaud Vault or our Vault. And it means that we're communicating with your Blackbaud products in a very compliant manner because you don't have any credit card data. If somebody breached your Razor's Edge or Illuminate or any one of that, there's nothing in there for them to take. Obviously they can take personal information, but they can't take credit card information because it doesn't exist. So that tokenization happens at source. It happens at source at the level 1 compliant organizations, of which iATS is a level 1 compliant organization. So that's how we handle it within the Blackbaud environment. Does anyone have any questions about that? Okay. Because outside of the Blackbaud environment, we obviously can't control that unless we're your payment processor, but there are really 3 ways to do it. One, which is become a level 1 certified PCI compliant processing stuff. So you become your own, you have your own compliance, you have your own systems, you manage everything yourself, and you take that responsibility on yourself. I would suggest, unless you are an enormous organization, you probably wouldn't want to go down that road. And then there's the extreme, which is the number 2, which is the don't do anything, let everyone else do it. So have no data in your system whatsoever. So let's say, for example, you're running a monthly giving campaign and you're not doing it in your CRM, you're not doing it within Blackbaud. Well, then you give it to a third party and say, run this program for me. I've got my 50,000 donors, 100,000 donors, 500 donors, whatever it is. And you just do that and you just manage it for me on my behalf. That's great. It then removes the need for you to be PCI certified because you're not holding that data. However, every time there's a change, you actually have to go and get it changed at a third-party site. So you're going to have to manage it like that. And also you have a responsibility to your donors. So you have to make sure that whichever organization you're using is PCI compliant themselves. So you can't, again, ignorance is no defense. You can't just say, well, they did it, it's not our fault. They're holding your data, it's their responsibility, and it's your reputation at play to make sure that whoever's managing your donors' data and credit card information is doing so with the highest levels of security. And then, of course, this is the option 3, which we talked about, which is where your providers are managing that process for you. So we have created a process and a secure system which allows you to process transactions in a secure and PCI compliant manner and reducing the risk and reducing that risk for you. I'm going to go speak a little quieter now.
Noise is fine, it's just light.
So, so we talk about this and say, well, we're non-profits. What's the risk? I'm not selling stuff on eBay. I'm not an auction, and I'm not trying to sell stuff. I'm not, what's the risk for us as an organization? Why are we targets? Well, sadly, given, and the less common worldwide commentary about the better, but sadly, actually, charitable organizations are listed amongst one of the highest levels of risk from a credit card perspective. So we as credit card processors, only to non-profits, we only serve the non-profit sector, we have about 10,000 customers. We actually pre-underwrite our customers. So we actually understand the risks and we take on board. But if you were to go to a third-party processor, of any one of the thousands that exist in the US, hundreds that exist in Canada, they would actually treat you with a much higher level of scrutiny and underwriting than they would a shop. And that's because of the level of the types of risk that we're talking about. So tumbling is probably the largest risk that we see, which is I steal 10,000 credit cards, 100,000 credit cards, and then I want to see which ones work. So I create a little tool and I go to a website, a donation website, which doesn't require me to do anything because I'm not getting any fees for services. It's literally and I just donate $1. And I just go through those 100,000 cards until it goes through. And then the ones that goes through, I know that they work, and now I can go ahead and go shopping.
Oh, wow.
And that is one of the things that we have seen in terms of organizations, which is the largest risk. Now, there are things that you can do to reduce that risk. Capture is an example of that. There's really those little pictures that that no one can understand or read, and you have to click them 10 times before you can get one. There's that can reduce the instances of that. And then there are very sophisticated tools that folks like us have, which actually prevent card tumbling. So what we do is we look and we scan for similar volume transactions that are submitted within a certain period of time. similar names. We even have schemes for random names, Mickey Mouse, Bart Simpson, things like that. So there are very sophisticated tools that we can use, and we also have we also have the ability to turn them on for you for our organizations. So many organizations don't necessarily understand fraud tools or fraud prevention tools very, very well. So what we have is an automated system. We actually had a customer here in Canada that was a victim of card tumbling. And what happens is we automated the flick-on switch. As soon as we saw all of those, an automated system comes up and it actually sort of says, this is tumbling. We block the cards, we notify the organization and say, you might want to check this. They may be valid, but they looked very suspicious, and then the organization can go and handle it as they needed to. There's also things like IP blocking. A lot of this stuff comes from international organizations, so we see a lot from Brazil, strangely enough. And so again, we have IP blocking, which allows us to switch off particular and block IPs from certain areas if we believe that there's fraudulent transactions that are coming through as well. So the point here is that there are tools that are out there. You need to ask your payment provider about those tools, and you need to use them because they're there to protect you and they're there to protect your donors. And so whichever payment processor you use, specifically for the online piece, please be aware. I'm almost without a doubt, if you use iATS, yes. If you use Blackbaud, I'm sure. If you use Moneris, undoubtedly, they have them, but you need to ask about them. And then this is something that we get a lot, so creation of clone charities. We actually have our own team that look after this. So it's actually somebody steals an identity of someone. They know that they're with an organization. They set up a charity. They put up a website, nice simple website, and then they try to submit an application to an organization like us, and to set up a merchant account. And then once they do that, they can start taking donations online, and the money is funneled into a bank account that has nothing to do with the actual real charity. So, one rather sad and horrible example of that was Katrina. So if you remember Hurricane Katrina, a historic analysis showed that there were about 4,000 websites that were set up illegally to collect donations for Katrina. So, from that perspective, these are things that we, as your payment processor, deal with because it's our job to protect you. So this is done from an underwriting perspective. That's how we actually work with our customers and our clients to make sure that they don't become victims of those things.
And I think locally, the North Shore Search and Rescue had something similar. I don't know, the group that was collecting the money was not North Shore Search and Rescue,
Right.
but they could have been a charity or not a charity. They were right.
Yeah,
So,
it is. There are, the sad fact is that certain people are very smart and very, very bad. And unfortunately, those two things aren't mutually exclusive. And people will always find ways around those. Now, in the case, for example, the issues, of course, is chargeback risk. Because it's not the amount. The amount is covered generally by the credit card. So it's not like if my card is compromised and somebody puts $1,000, American Express will give me that money back. But the chargeback fee of 20, 25, 30, 35, whatever that number is, the non-profit is responsible for that. Now, there are certain, that will grace you that. There are certain processors that will grace those chargeback fees to a certain extent, but some won't. And if you have multiple transactions, those fees can add up. We put this on because I thought this was kind of, funny is the wrong word, but it was interesting, is that there was an auction hosted for Apple in 2013, and the prize was to have lunch with the CEO, Tim Cook, and the person that won that had actually stolen the credit card. And it actually went through, and it was actually not until retrospect that they actually had to rectify it. But it was an example of that there are always areas where you have to be very, very careful. Auctions are a great example, specifically for ACH, which is quite interesting.
did they show up for lunch?
I don't know. That's a good question. That would be pretty gutsy, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I know.
That would be very
Well, I
gutsy.
hope the original owner of the credit card got to have that.
Yeah, that's right. So ACH is not immune either. We think of ACH because it's not really a real-time tool. I mean, I guess with this...
Right,
Direct debit.
ACH, direct debit, EFT. recurring monthly through your bank account. We don't see that. I guess there's the interact, e-transfer, things like that now. But from a recurring, we don't believe that there is a lot of opportunity for fraud. But indeed there is. There are people that can hijack bank accounts. They can hack into your bank account. They can control your bank account. And they're not only satisfied with emptying your bank account, but what they'll do is that they'll deposit and they'll go to a charity and then they'll donate $1,000, $2,000. We've actually seen it for $2,400, I think it was. And then they call the charity up and say that actually they only meant to donate $24. They get the refund of the whole amount. But the original amount, it takes 10 days to go through. So they actually got that refunded amount much more. So they actually netted about 2,200 or whatever it was. So ACH transactions aren't outside of the scope of fraudsters either, I'm afraid. So awareness is the key thing. So first of all, be aware that it is a risk. Be aware, and the PCI process will actually make you aware. Because actually a PCI, there's an expression I used to use, which is, you can't manage what you don't measure. And if you're not measuring it, then you don't know what's going on in your organization. So the PCI process, by the very fact that you're going to be focusing and analyzing on where you're collecting data and credit card information, the very fact that you're doing that is going to make you more aware of the risks that are within your organization. Understand your payment processes' capabilities. Understand what they have available, understand what fraud tools they have, what underwriting systems, what checking systems they have. Make sure that you're using them if you're not. Make sure that they have velocity checking, which is the thing I was talking about for card tumbling, IP blocking, whether or not three-digit security, the CVV2 is being used for online transactions. Many people now are opting out of address verification because address verification actually it's proven you can actually reduce the volume of transactions because, it's not perfect. So if I live on Mathers Avenue and I put AVE dot rather than avenue, then it sometimes might not go through. So a lot of people in the US now are actually removing that completely because they're getting too many rejects and opting more for CVV2 because there's a high level of accuracy. I'm not suggesting you do that, but again, you have to analyze your data and you have to analyze the risk for your organization. And of course, going through the PCI process just allows you to understand where you're touching their credit card data. So, that is in 45 minutes, sort of a very high-level overview of PCI compliance, about what it is. I think, in summary, what I would say is that every single person that put their hand up and said they accept credit cards has a responsibility to go through the PCI process. And it is your responsibility to your cardholders, to your donors, to go through that process to secure their data and to secure your organization. We, as I said, we're not a provider of PCI authentication or validation services. We can't validate you, but we work enough in this that we can help you. And we work with a lot of large, complex organizations purely for them to bounce ideas off and to share, what are the best practices, how are things doing, and what are the other firms that can help. So we're here, we're your partner in this process, and we'd love to support you in anything that you do. But I think the key here is to recognize that it is an important thing. If your organization isn't doing it or is not looking into it, I would recommend, the one takeaway is that you should be, because it's real and it is only going to become more important as the volume increases. So that being said, now is my turn to pitch my session and say that if you don't attend my session, Visa will fine your organization. So our discussion this afternoon is going to be more of a sort of a free-flow discussion about maybe your specifics, about specific organizations. We have Courtney and Jess from our organization that will be there as well, just to talk a little bit about it, just to have more of a brainstorming discussion about it. Kat?
Sorry, the biggest problem I have with PCI compliance isn't the online stuff, and it isn't the Razor's Edge or what we do daily. It's the receptionist or the person that's on the phone that's writing it down. It's on a scrap piece of paper. And the one that I find absolutely frightening for all of us is how many people in your office now have redactors? Like, are you redacting your credit card numbers? Some people are looking at me blankly. Are you scratching them out? Or a redactor is the blackout thing that's going to black and white. Because I go to a lot of sites and I see the big binder of monthly donors and all the credit card numbers are right there. It's not locked up, right? And then, or somebody says it's in the store. I'm like, I can break the drawer, and I'm not very strong. So that's the one that always does me. And that, I mean, if I'm smart enough to say, that's why you're full of credit card numbers, it's our responsibility to redact them, to hide those numbers. And I don't know if you're going to talk about that this afternoon, but that's the frightening part for me. And the other one is our appeal cards. They all come back with the credit card numbers on it. You're supposed to enter them in the Razor's process and then get rid of it. Right? You redact it, whatever you need to do, but we should not be allowing those credit card numbers to show up anywhere.
That's right.
Other than, I think every process a person and hide them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry, I had to say that because it's just driving me nuts.
So do you mean a Sharpie? Is a Sharpie good enough?
No.
No, because you can hold it to the light. Is that why?
A whole punch,
That's not a movie.
Whole
a whole
punch.
punch, the last four numbers, the last four numbers are not in the middle, it's a whole punch twice in the middle.
There you go, whole punching.
Yes.
Is there not a concern of having people mail credit card numbers through the mail?
Yep.
Sure, there's a concern.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do it.
And it's not best practice that people do it.
Yeah.
And there is not an easy way around that, because if you're direct mail by very nature is mail. But then it's the question, well, if you are receiving that, remember, you can't control what happens out. So if somebody chooses to do that and send it to you, at that point is your responsibility. So the point with which you do this, whether or not you do it internally or use a caging house or something like that, then it's, well, what are you doing now within your, as soon as that gets into your organization, then how are you managing that piece of data? And then you're putting it either into the Razor's Edge, which is then tokenizing it either themselves or through iATS, or they're doing something else. Or the question is, well, what happens if it's not? What if you're sitting it outside of that and you're just setting up a recurring? Those are the things that you have to be aware of. And then that, to Kathy's point, that piece of paper, what are you doing with that piece of paper? Because throwing it in, I mean, even shredding it isn't necessarily, depending on what kind of shredder that you have, is not necessarily completely secure.
I just wanted to address the group. I think the Illuminate group already knows this. So we were talking about, why we have so many different revenue streams coming from, we have multiple different sources where credit card information is coming to us. And in my research, I was trying to figure out, why do we have merchant services and why do we have iATS? Like, how did we get both of them when they both kind of do the same thing? Well, I just wanted to let the group know so you don't have to do the research yourself. iATS is able to do Canadian transactions on debit, where merchant services can only do it for American debit, not Canadian. So iATS does offer slightly more than what you're getting from merchant services when you want to do the checklist to see, can all of our needs be met? Well, iATS is just one step above merchant services. Maybe they're going to do it in the future, but they can't do it right now.
So I'm not proposing iATS as a scale service because it just provides, it's good, it works.
Great.
But because we're being charged by BMS, if we don't use it, we get charged. Is there, because you must, obviously working in the area, you must have had this problem come up with a million other different charities, right? How do we get around it? Because I would like to use iATS, but just financially it doesn't work for us.
Oh, what you said to the group was, you said, first I put it through BDMS, and then whatever doesn't go through, I put it through iATS. So maybe you can explain why he gets rejects from BDMS, and then iATS, it works with iATS. So
yeah. So
and your question as well.
I'm not going to speak to the Blackbaud piece. I'll talk about iATS merchants, sort of our processing. So we've been doing this for a while, and so we have systems that are set up. So there's a couple of answers to your question. First of all, we work with customers that are either want to use us or do use us, but are being put under pressure by Blackbaud to actually use their merchant services. So what we would say is, obviously, your choice is your choice. we would work with you on commercial terms to see whether or not we can help. That's the first thing. The second thing is we would also like to look at your whole portfolio to see, well, what is for example, if you have a recurring giving program, we at iATS, we have the ability in the agreement with the banks to recur and to process transactions after they've expired.
Yeah.
So that, if you look at that, and if you think about an attrition rate of whatever the expiry attrition rate is, anything from 7 to 13%, then that in of itself, by processing even a small percentage of those cards, by far makes up the difference in that extra transactional fee that you were being charged. So I would say that what we would do is we would work with you, and we actually have a team. One of the things that we pride ourselves on is we actually have humans that answer. We're there. We answer the phone. We're in Georgia. You can even come and see us if you fancy. We've got a new coffee machine. And so, we would work with you to actually understand exactly what it is that you're transacting, through what streams, and then we would look to come up with a proposal that will allow you to, make the decision that's right for your organisation.
And can you handle U.S. credit cards? Because with BBMS, we can't. You can either have Canadian credit cards or U.S. credit cards.
Like you can have both for price.
What it was doing though, there was some, who said that? Sorry, thank you. But there are some U.S. credit cards that will not process through BBMS, so then we ended up having to do them through iATS. Or through something else. Oh, there was a handle at the time, the U.S. term. But it was something, and I phoned BBMS, like merchant services, I'm like, I don't understand why this monthly donor was from Seattle, and we cannot process his credit card. Ridiculous.
Maybe I don't know the specifics of merchant services. I didn't have anything to do with it when I was at Blackbaud. I was dealing with the international side. But it may be something to do with the way that they acquire. So maybe they have a different acquirer in the US and in Canada. We have the way that we've set up our acquiring systems is that we can process any card from anywhere. So even if you have a Singapore, Hong Kong, Australian card, it comes to us, we process it irrespective. And our fee structure is set that it doesn't matter where it comes from, you always have a flat fee structure, there's no difference. So, for us it doesn't matter where the card comes from, where the cardholder is based. Yes?
Yeah, we have to use CyberSource for our US Foundation credit cards.
Which one, sorry?
CyberSource? So
Okay,
we'll
yeah.
choose CyberSource.
We would set up, so depending on the organisation, one of the things that we like to do is, because we can quite easily set up multiple currencies, we would set up different accounts. Because some people in Canada, they want to accept US money, but they don't necessarily want to deal with the FX rate on the credit card because it's miserable. So they have a US bank account. So we would set up a US merchant account, but in Canada, that allows you, so we can do that, and allows you then to take, process, and deposit American credit cards into an American bank account. And then you can hedge the funds and do whatever it is that you want.
That's what we do.
Yeah.
But we do have, the international address book really interesting because we have huge decline rates or non-processing rates because international alumni. We're going to an event, having an event in Hong Kong and trying to get those to go through. It's frustrating.
It is. The attrition of those monthly donors, that is I think it's one of the things that we work very hard with our customers on, because that is a huge volume of lost opportunity right there. And unfortunately, some organizations with incredibly large, they'll just keep processing those transactions time and time again. And our goal is, well, look, let's take that book of whatever that number is, if it's 5,000, 10,000, whatever number is, and then let's understand why the transactions are being rejected, and then work on a way to actually reduce that. Our reject rates, our focus, and actually the way that we measure ourselves is to reduce reject rates on recurring giving, because that's real money. A transaction fee is whatever it is, 10 cents, 20 cents, 30 cents. That's kind of small compared to the lost revenue of either expired, lapsed credit cards, or credit cards that are being rejected because they are, I don't know, because they're foreign and they're not.
No, based on the Canadian banks can't verify them. Well, that's a shame.
Well, that's not, so the Canadian banks can verify them, but they choose not to. So there are levels as a processor where you should. Now we choose to. So we have an open thread. So we choose to process those threads. Now, if the card's not good, we'll reject it. But we won't stop a card because we're worried that there is, well, it's a good in Singapore. Well, Singapore, it's a bit dodgy. Let's not process that card. There's no. We wouldn't do that. So a lot of people would set up systems would say, well, we're not going to accept cards internationally because the risk is higher, and we don't want to take that risk on.
And the address verification is really tricky. So in the system, we found out you have to take out the space in the postal code to be processed and be accepted and to get a test. But then when you try and get that information into the database, and you're missing the space in the postal. Yeah, so we're writing code now to take that out.
So a story, when, I don't know if those of you that go back, that remember iATS at the very beginning when we were serving the non-profit sector back in 2002, we were actually a division of Ticketmaster Canada then. Does anyone remember that? Yeah. So we started on Hornby and Drake. Do you remember the Ticketmaster offices on Hornby and Drake? That was that was where I was when I first came to iATS. Well, Ticketmaster actually switched off address verification completely because they saw such a high reject rate for an AVS that they just said, look, we're not even going to bother because it was costing them too much money. And we all know that nothing was going to stop Ticketmaster from taking your money. Any other questions?
I have one last
Yes.
issue that I've seen at a site. Has anybody else run into this where their IT department won't even let you process in Razor's Edge anymore? Tracy should know what I'm talking about here. They won't even let you type in credit card numbers on a keyboard now because key capturing. You can capture keystroke capturing. Anyways, that was the first time I'd run into that one, and I wondered if anybody else has been running into that. So the IT folks had said you can no longer. Oh, that's why you're down to one machine.
We actually don't have it's like a computer that acts like a POS machine, and everybody has to process on that one PCI technically compliant computer.
Do you have a pad, a special pad that you type the number in? Or do you have a swiping machine?
No.
Because what Kathy's talking about is that, if you take it to the extreme, if you're using a machine, somebody could put a little bit of a code to actually register the keystrokes. And what they do is that they just ignore everything until they see a sequence of digits, and then they'll go, oh, that's a credit card, and then they'll take it, and then they'll send it out. So that's actually, what's the name for that, Courtney? There's a specific name for it. It's key logging. It's key logging. Thank you. So there's actually there's another way of doing it, which is a little pad. It's like a little calculator pad that then you put into your USB port that bypasses that. So that's a very extreme, but mostly that's for like call centers and places that are doing that all day, every day. They're the real.
Yeah, Blackbaud has that. It's a point-to-point encryption. Blackbaud CRM and then it will be coming out.
I'm sorry, I misunderstood that or I didn't hear it enough.
So the device that Andrew is referring to, an outside piece of hardware, often called point-to-point encryption. So then you key in there, like at a call center, it's keyed in at the call center, gets encrypted there, and then whatever's passing through the software, it's completely removing the software.
Fantastic.
From PCI compliance, because there's a lot of organizations that have an outside computer that's dedicated to PCI, but then you're having to you're retyping information as opposed to just keying it directly into the software. So this will give the ability to do that. So it's
do you know the time frame for that?
It's available in Blackbaud CRM now, and then coming in Razor's Edge next year, and we have to eliminate online interest as well.
And that's for the when you physically.
2018.
And then but it is using an outside, an extra piece of hardware.
Still, that still stops double data entry. So whatever charge we're going to be charged for getting the PIN pad or whatever it's going to be called, it's still worth it to me than have all my sites doing double data entry. Because that's what's happening at the sites that are getting locked down. Is they're now managing several different programs. They've got something on Scotiabank Online, something on they're back to PIN pads, like actual Moneris PIN pads or whatever, because of the key logging. Okay, cool. Thanks.
Yeah, that thing.
We don't store anything in usage. We don't store anything in the usage. From the online pages, it goes directly into the mayor. We have a bit of tokenization for the EFT transfer.
Yeah.
A combination of payment processing and tokenization to do what you described earlier.
Yeah.